The words found me in the middle of a busy room and made everything around me go completely silent. I could ruin your life again with one phone call. The VIP lounge at Sterling City Club was doing what it always did on a Thursday evening. Soft jazz drifting from the quartet near the windows, crystal glasses catching the low amber light, executives and their guests arranged across leather chairs in the comfortable, deliberate posture of people who have paid significantly for the right to be exactly where they are. Miranda Vale leaned toward me with the practiced ease of someone delivering a quiet cruelty they have rehearsed many times. Her perfume was sharp and expensive. Her smile was perfectly arranged. "Remember how that worked out last time?" she said softly. My hands tightened on the guest list tablet I was holding. Not from weakness. From the particular physical effort of keeping something controlled that very much wanted not to be. Because she wasn't bluffing. She had done it before. She knew, I knew that. A few members nearby glanced in our direction with the polite, peripheral attention people give to something that might be interesting without quite committing to looking directly. Miranda straightened. She lifted her champagne glass. She smiled in the direction of the room with the satisfied expression of someone who has just placed something heavy on another person's chest and enjoyed the weight of it. "Let's see if you survive it twice," she said sweetly. The room kept moving. Inside my chest, something went very still. Because Miranda Vale was standing inside the club, I ran. She moved past me into the lounge with the smooth, unhurried confidence of someone who has never once walked into a room and doubted her right to be in it. Staff moved quickly in her direction. A server appeared with a fresh glass. The floor manager nodded a greeting that was slightly more deferential than the one he gave most members. A couple near the corner recognized her and lifted their glasses in acknowledgement. Miranda Vale had status. The particular layered kind that builds over time in a city like this one. Built from wealth, from a strategically excellent marriage, from a decade of deliberate social cultivation in the exact rooms where social cultivation produces results. Her husband, Clifton Vale, was one of Sterling City Club's most senior members. His corporate memberships funded a significant portion of the club's annual operating revenue. His network touched nearly every industry circle that our membership drew from. Miranda moved through the lounge like she had designed it herself. Members smiled, staff accommodated, and nobody looking at the room from outside would have had any reason to question whether she was exactly what she appeared to be. But I knew something about Miranda Vale that the room didn't know. I knew who she was before the status, before the marriage, before the club membership, and the expensive perfume, and the smile calibrated to produce maximum effect. I knew her from 5 years ago, and she knew me. My name is Paige Mercer. I was the Director of Member Experience at Sterling City Club, a role I had been building toward for 4 years through the kind of steady, methodical work that doesn't make for compelling stories until the moment it becomes essential. Director of Member Experience sounds, at first hearing, like an elevated form of hospitality management. It is not. At a club like Sterling, where access is the actual product and discretion is the operating principle, the Director of Member Experience is the person who manages everything that keeps the institution functioning at the level its membership pays for and expects. Staff oversight, vendor relationships, member conduct policy, VIP access management, event logistics, compliance with the club's governance framework. The formal authority to enforce the membership standards that every person who walked through those doors had agreed to when they signed their membership contract. The job ran on trust. The board trusted me with access to every system in the building. The staff trusted me to protect them when difficult situations arose. The members trusted that the club they had joined operated consistently and fairly regardless of who was involved. I had earned every piece of that trust. I had rebuilt it piece by piece, after Miranda Vale spent the better part of 2 years trying to make sure no institution in this industry would ever extend it to me again. The fact that I was standing in this lounge with enforcement authority over her access was not luck. It was the result of a very long, very difficult road. 5 years earlier, I had a different job. The Westbridge Hospitality Group was a mid-sized operation that managed 3 private dining clubs and 2 event venues across the city. The work was demanding and specific, exactly the kind of operational environment I had trained for and was genuinely good at. Miranda Vale was my direct supervisor. She was everything the role seemed to require. Sharp, impeccably presented, technically fluent in the industry's expectations, and socially fluent in the networks that made things happen. She moved through the organization with the particular ease of someone who understood both the formal and the informal power structures and had positioned herself effectively within both. She was good at her job. She was also, I came to understand over 2 years of working closely with her, someone who managed her professional environment with a level of deliberateness that extended well beyond competence into something more calculated. She tracked what other people knew. She managed who got credit for what. She maintained relationships with the people who evaluated performance in ways that kept her insulated from accountability while keeping the people under her consistently exposed. I understood these qualities about her gradually, through the accumulation of small incidents that each seemed individually explainable until the pattern became impossible to miss. Then a major client event went wrong, and Miranda's response to it showed me exactly who she was. The client event was a private dinner for one of the group's most significant corporate accounts, 60 guests. Specific seating requirements communicated clearly in advance. A wine selection that had been ordered, confirmed, and supposedly staged the week prior. On the night of the event, 2 things went wrong in sequence. The seating arrangement had been incorrectly transferred from the original brief to the floor setup, a miscommunication between the event coordination team and the front-of-house staff. And the specific wine that had been ordered for the host table was not in the staging inventory, having apparently been pulled for a different event earlier that week without proper documentation. Neither issue was catastrophic. Both were the kind of operational problems that experienced hospitality teams solve smoothly mid-event when they have good leadership guiding them. Miranda panicked, not visibly in front of the client. She was too composed for that. But the decisions she made in the 40 minutes between when the problems surfaced and when the event concluded were not the decisions of someone focused on solving the problem. They were the decisions of someone focused on managing the narrative about what had caused it. By midnight, the client had been managed adequately. By the following morning, Miranda had constructed a version of the evening in which every failure traced back to my oversight and my decisions. She presented this version to the group's managing director before I arrived at work. The termination meeting lasted 19 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when I walked in and again when I walked out, and the precision of that number is the kind of thing that lodges permanently in your memory when you're trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. The managing director was professional. He cited specific incidents. Every one of them had been framed and presented to him by Miranda before I'd had any opportunity to offer a different account. I said clearly and directly that the account he had been given was inaccurate. He listened. He thanked me for my perspective. He told me the decision was final. I cleaned my desk and left. But Miranda didn't stop when I walked out the door. Over the following weeks, she made calls to industry contacts and recruiters in the city's hospitality network. The specific language she used varied slightly by audience, but the core message was consistent. Paige Mercer had caused a major client incident through negligence. She was difficult to manage. She created liability for any organization that employed her. The calls worked. Interviews that had been progressing stopped progressing. Recruiters who had been warm became distant. My name in the specific professional ecosystem I had spent years building a reputation within had been attached to a story I had never told and a character I had never been. It took 2 years to begin rebuilding. The rebuild was not dramatic or inspiring in the way rebuilds sometimes are in stories. It was just work. Smaller positions than I'd had before. Operations roles at venues that didn't know my name and didn't particularly care about my history. Early mornings, late evenings. The kind of sustained, patient effort that produces results slowly and without acknowledgement. I learned things during that period that I hadn't known before. I learned exactly how operational failures actually happen, in the abstract way I had understood them from a management perspective, but from the ground level, in the actual sequence of small decisions and communication gaps that build up to a problem. I learned how to document things properly, not as a bureaucratic exercise, but as a genuine operational discipline. Because I had experienced firsthand what happens when the documented record of events diverges from what actually occurred, and I was never going to be in that position again. I learned who could be trusted in this industry and who couldn't, and how to tell the difference before it became important. And I learned patience. Not the passive, hopeful kind, the active kind, the kind that keeps doing the work correctly while waiting for circumstances to align. Sterling City Club posted the operations manager position during my second year of the rebuild. I applied, I got the job, and from that day, I worked with everything I had. The promotion to Director of Member Experience came after 3 years at Sterling. The board's decision was unanimous, according to the chair who called me with the news. The member satisfaction scores during my tenure had been the highest in the club's measurable history. The vendor relationships I had built were strong and well documented. The staff turnover rate had dropped significantly. 3 separate operational crises during my tenure had been handled cleanly, without member impact, and with full post-event documentation that the board had reviewed and praised. The promotion came with formal enforcement authority over member access and conduct, the power to restrict, suspend, or revoke privileges based on documented violations of the club's membership agreement. This authority was significant. The club's membership included some of the most prominent people in the city. Using that authority required impeccable judgment, clear documentation, and the kind of professional confidence that comes from knowing your position is built on genuine merit. I was ready for it. I had been building toward it for years without knowing exactly what I was building toward. 3 weeks after the board made the promotion official, I walked into the Sterling City Club lobby on a Tuesday morning for my first full day as Director of Member Experience, and Miranda Vale was standing at the reception desk updating her guest access preferences. She looked up. We recognized each other at exactly the same moment. The recognition moved through her expression in layers. First, the simple identification, the neural click of a face matching a stored memory. Then the context assembling around the identification. Who I was, where we had last intersected, what that intersection had cost. Then something more calculated. A quick assessment of what my presence here meant, what role I appeared to hold, what that implied about the dynamic between us in this particular space. All of this happened in approximately 2 seconds. Then she smiled. "Paige," she said, warm and easy, the smile of someone who has decided that the gracious approach serves them best. "Miranda," I said, "you work here." She said it lightly, the same phrasing she would use throughout the months that followed, always with that specific intonation that made work sound like something I was doing until something better came along. "I'm the Director of Member Experience," I said. She held my gaze for a brief moment. Something moved behind her eyes, a quick recalibration. She filed away what I had just told her, and I could almost see her mind organizing the new information against whatever she had planned to do next. "How lovely," she said. She turned back to the reception desk and finished her update. I walked to my office, and I already understood that what had just started was not going to be simple. The first real power play came 3 days after that lobby encounter. Miranda called the club to reserve a table in the VIP lounge for the following Thursday evening. Standard request. Her membership tier included VIP access, but the reservation request also included a note asking that the adjacent lounge seating be cleared for her exclusive use. That was not a standard request. It was not included in her membership tier. It would have displaced 3 other confirmed reservations from members who had booked in good faith. The front desk brought the request to me, as all non-standard reservation requests were required to be. I declined the adjacent seating request and confirmed her standard reservation. She called back within the hour. She spoke with the front desk manager, not with me, and restated the request. She mentioned her husband's membership level. She mentioned her tenure as a member. She mentioned that this type of accommodation had been made for her in the past. The front desk manager brought the second request to me. I declined again and confirmed the standard reservation. Miranda arrived on Thursday evening without saying anything further about it. She sat at her reserved table. She was gracious to the staff. She smiled at the members nearby. She glanced in my direction once across the lounge with an expression that said the matter was not closed. But for that evening it was. The pressure accumulated the way pressure accumulates, not in one large wave, but in a steady, consistent series of smaller ones, each individually manageable and collectively exhausting. Reserved tables that she expected to be held past their standard time. Guest additions beyond her membership tiers included allowance, requests for complimentary services that weren't part of any membership agreement, staff direction that she gave as if she held an authority she had never been granted. Staff accommodated where they could because she was a high-profile member and because high-profile members generated social energy that benefited the club's atmosphere. But the edges kept being pushed, and staff began coming to my office. First it was the bar supervisor, a careful, experienced man named Otto who had been at Sterling for 6 years and who had never once come to me with a staff complaint without being certain it was warranted. She spoke to the new bartender in a way I'm not comfortable documenting informally, he said. I'd prefer it go into the formal record. I took his statement. I wrote it up properly. I opened a member conduct file. 2 weeks later, the VIP lounge server team lead came in with something similar. Then 2 more staff members separately. The conduct file grew, quietly, methodically, with dates and descriptions and staff signatures confirming that each entry was accurate. Miranda didn't know the file existed. She was focused on a different kind of pressure. The personal targeting began about 6 weeks after she became a regular presence in the lounge. I became aware of it gradually, through staff who mentioned things in passing, through members who asked questions that contained embedded assumptions they could only have acquired from someone else. Miranda was talking about me. Not loudly, not in ways that could be directly quoted or challenged in a specific moment, but in the small, informal spaces of club social life, the sidebar conversations, the quiet exchange between courses at a member dinner, the particular intimacy of a lounge where everyone present knew everyone else, and information moved freely. She was planting things, small, targeted details, nothing that constituted a direct accusation, just enough to create a slight uncertainty in people who heard it. A vague reference to my professional background, an offhand comment about whether certain recent decisions had been fully considered. The particular art of the question that isn't quite a statement. I just wonder whether she's really the right person for this kind of role, you know? I recognized the technique. I had experienced its results 5 years earlier. But this time I was not the person she thought she was dealing with. This time I had a file. I had staff statements. I had operational authority. And I had learned, in the 2 years it took me to rebuild my career from what she had done to it the first time, exactly what proper documentation was worth. She was most direct when we were alone or nearly alone. In the corridor outside the member dining room after a Thursday evening service, near the elevator bank during a quieter midweek afternoon. In the brief moments between a member greeting and a staff interaction, when the space between us was small enough for a quiet sentence to travel without anyone else hearing it clearly. "Still here?" she would say. Just that. Nothing that could be taken to a board. "Surprised they trust you with this." I heard someone on the board was asking questions about the recent issues. The last one wasn't true, as far as I could determine. But that wasn't the point of saying it. The point was the moment after she said it. The fractional second when my face processed the information, when the old wound she was aiming at responded before the rest of me could catch up. She watched for that response. She collected it. I think it was, in some specific way, what she came to the club for. Not just the access and the status, but the continued ability to see the evidence of what she had done to me 5 years earlier still living in my expression. I worked on removing it. I got better. But I also understood something clearly. Miranda was not going to stop until the circumstances of our dynamic changed in a way she couldn't manage around. I focused on the file. Sterling City Club's membership agreement was 42 pages. Most members had never read it fully. They reviewed the pricing tiers, the access inclusions, and the cancellation terms, and they signed at the bottom and considered the matter settled. But the agreement contained a detailed member conduct policy, specific, clearly written, with enumerated categories of conduct that constituted violations and explicit consequences attached to each category. Verbal harassment of staff was listed. Unauthorized use of club resources was listed. Deliberate misrepresentation to other members about club policies was listed. Repeated failure to comply with guest registration requirements was listed. Each one had a corresponding consequence, from formal warning to access restriction to full membership suspension, with the Director of Member Experience holding enforcement authority for all steps up to and including access restriction. Miranda had signed this agreement. She had signed it when she became a member 2 years before I took the director role, and she had signed an updated version the previous renewal cycle. Her signature was on file, which meant that every conduct violation she committed was not just a behavioral problem. It was a documented breach of a legal agreement she had entered voluntarily. I kept this in mind every time I added a new entry to her conduct file, and Miranda kept giving me entries to add. The unauthorized guest incident happened on a Saturday evening during the club's quarterly social event. These events drew the largest single-night attendance of the calendar. Members bringing guests, the lounge fully seated, the energy higher and more social than a regular evening. Miranda arrived with a group of 12. Her membership tier included 2 registered guests per visit. Any additional guests required advance registration, approval, and the appropriate supplementary fee, a policy communicated clearly in the membership agreement and at the front desk. Miranda had registered 0 guests in advance. She walked her group of 12 directly to the VIP lounge. Security at the lounge entrance asked her to confirm guest registration status. She told them it was handled. Security, uncertain about how to manage a senior member's assertion on a busy evening, let the group through while they attempted to verify. The verification attempt reached my desk within minutes through our standard radio protocol. I went to the lounge. I confirmed the status directly. 0 pre-registered guests. 12 individuals without authorization in the VIP space. I spoke with Miranda clearly and professionally. I explained the requirement. I offered a process. Guests could be registered and the fee applied to her account, and the appropriate members of the group could then access the lounge properly. She told me the policy was inconvenient. I told her the policy was the policy. She complied eventually, with visible irritation and a specific kind of quiet fury that she directed at me rather than at the staff present. I added the full incident to the file with complete detail. The file was detailed and organized by the time the board's monthly conduct review cycle arrived. 17 entries over 4 months. Staff statements. Incident descriptions. Policy reference citations for each entry. Guest registration violation documentation. 2 formal complaint letters from other members who had witnessed specific incidents. The board's conduct review committee met privately each month to review any files that had been flagged for their attention. Mine was flagged at the 3-month mark. The committee's response was cautious. Clifton Vale's membership contribution was significant. His social network represented a meaningful portion of the club's corporate membership base. The committee acknowledged the pattern, but requested that I continue building the file before formal action was taken. I understood their position. I didn't fully agree with it, but I understood it. I continued building the file. What I also did, quietly and professionally, was draft the formal revocation documentation. Not to file immediately, just to have it ready. Properly formatted, correctly cited, signed by me in my capacity as Director of Member Experience, with every supporting document referenced and organized in the attached appendix. I kept it in my desk drawer, and I waited for the incident that would move the committee from cautious to decisive. Miranda provided it 2 weeks later. I had just concluded a brief disagreement with Miranda at the edge of the VIP lounge. She had once again brought guests beyond her registered allowance. 2 this time, which was smaller than the Saturday incident, but was now the third separate guest violation in the file. I had handled it calmly and by the book, documenting the names and applying the supplementary fee to her account. Miranda had said what she always said in those moments, that the policy was unnecessary for members at her level, that the fee was insulting, that the accommodation she was requesting was not unreasonable. I had said what I always said. The policy applied equally. The process was the same for all members. She looked at me when the exchange was finished with the expression she saved for when we were close enough that a quiet sentence could travel without being overheard. "You know I can still destroy you," she said. Her voice was perfectly calm. The specific calmness of someone who has said something like this before and found that it works. "I've done it once," she said. "Consider that." She walked back into the lounge. I stood in the corridor for a moment. My hands were steady. Because something had shifted in me during those 5 years of rebuilding that Miranda had apparently not accounted for when she had decided who I was and how I would respond to being threatened. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I was done waiting. The board's monthly conduct review was scheduled for the following Wednesday. I submitted Miranda's complete file 48 hours in advance, the standard submission timeline, with a formal request for the committee's final determination on the accumulated violations. I also attached the draft revocation documentation I had prepared. The review committee met Wednesday morning. I was present for the first portion to answer questions and then asked to wait outside while they deliberated. I sat in the corridor outside the board conference room for 22 minutes. When the door opened, the board chair, a steady, fair-minded man named Mr. Adekoya, who had been with the club for 14 years, came out and stood with me in the hallway. He told me the committee had reviewed the complete file. He said the documentation was thorough and clearly organized. He said the committee had discussed the revenue implications of Clifton Vale's membership thoroughly and had reached a conclusion. The conclusion was this: the club's operational integrity depended on consistent, equal application of its conduct policy. Any exception made based on membership revenue rather than conduct merit would fundamentally undermine the standards that justified the club's premium position. He told me the decision had been unanimous. He told me the enforcement action was mine to execute, per my directorial authority. He told me Miranda Vale's VIP privileges were to be revoked effective immediately. The final incident that had resolved the committee's hesitation happened the previous Friday evening. Miranda had been in the VIP lounge when a disagreement developed between her and a junior server, a young woman named Zara who had been with the club for 8 months and whose work had consistently received positive member feedback. The disagreement was over a wine recommendation. Zara had offered a suggestion based on what Miranda had described as her preference. Miranda had rejected it. Zara had offered an alternative. Miranda had rejected that too, and then had said something to Zara that 2 other members seated nearby heard clearly. Both of those members had submitted formal complaint letters to my office by Monday morning. The letters described language that was personal, demeaning, and delivered at a volume that had been audible to the surrounding tables. Zara had given a staff statement the following day that was consistent with the 2-member accounts in every specific detail. Miranda had, in the middle of a populated VIP lounge, created a public scene that had been witnessed, heard, and formally documented by multiple independent parties who had no relationship with each other and no reason to coordinate their accounts. This was no longer a file of individual incidents requiring judgment calls. This was a pattern with a witnessed, documented escalation that the board could not reasonably decline to act on. I signed the revocation document in my office on Wednesday afternoon. Miranda arrived at the VIP lounge entrance at 8:15 that evening. She was dressed for the room, elegant, composed, moving with her standard confidence. She had a guest with her, a woman I recognized from the member social network as a regular companion at her Thursday bookings. The lounge security staff were positioned at the entrance as usual. I was standing near the operations station approximately 15 feet from the entrance, visible but not positioned in a way that suggested I was specifically waiting. I was reviewing an event coordination document. I had been there for 12 minutes. Miranda approached the entrance. The security officer stepped forward. "Good evening, Mrs. Vale." She smiled. "Mrs. Vale, I need to let you know that your VIP lounge access has been suspended pending a formal review by the Member Conduct Committee." The smile held for approximately 1 full second. Then it changed. Not dramatically. She was too controlled for dramatic. But the warmth drained out of it and left something that was still performing composure, but had lost the ease underneath. She looked past the security officer. She found me, 15 feet away with my event document still in my hands, looking at her with the steady, professional expression of someone doing their job correctly. She held my gaze, and I watched her understand, fully, completely, without any remaining ambiguity, exactly who had signed the document the security officer was holding. She walked toward me, not rushed, not with the energy of someone who has lost control of the situation and is reacting from that place. Miranda was too experienced for that. She walked toward me the way she had always moved, composed, deliberate, with the posture of someone who intends to manage whatever comes next. "You did this," she said. It was not loud. The guests nearby could not have heard it clearly. "The Conduct Review Committee determined that VIP access restrictions were warranted based on the documented file," I said. "You built that file. It's a factual record of documented incidents. Multiple staff members contributed statements. 2 member complaints were submitted independently." She was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Not the casual cruelty of the corridor whispers, not the practiced social warmth of her public performance. Something rawer than either of those things. "I told you," she said quietly. "I told you I could ruin you again." "You said that," I agreed. "Last Thursday, near the entrance." She looked at me for a moment longer. "And here we are," I said simply, not with satisfaction in my voice, not with anything extra. Just the factual observation of someone who has arrived at a particular moment after a long journey and is standing in it steadily. The security officer had followed at a respectful distance. Miranda looked at the lounge. At the entrance, she had walked through dozens of times with the complete confidence of someone whose access was permanent. The revocation document was 1 page. I had drafted it cleanly, clear language, policy citations, the specific violations that had been formally reviewed by the Conduct Committee, the committee's determination, and the enforcement action taken in accordance with Section 14.2 of the membership agreement. 1 signature line at the bottom. My name, my title, my authority, formally exercised in writing for the first time against a member who had counted on never facing it. I had signed it in my office that afternoon with a pen that had been sitting in my desk drawer since my first week as director. The copy filed in Miranda's membership record was precise, accurate, and entirely unassailable, built from 4 months of careful, consistent, properly sourced documentation that reflected exactly what had occurred. The copy delivered to her home address would arrive the following morning by certified mail. I didn't need to show it to her at the lounge entrance. The security officer's communication was sufficient. But I want to be honest about something. I had thought about this moment. Not obsessively, not with the consuming energy of someone whose primary motivation is personal satisfaction, but in the quiet, factual way that you think about the resolution of something that has been unresolved for a long time. And standing in that lounge, watching Miranda Vale encounter a consequence she had never once considered possible, I felt something that I had not expected. Not triumph, just completion. Miranda looked at the entrance for a long moment. Her guest had fallen a few steps behind, having read the energy of the situation accurately enough to create some distance from it. The lounge inside was lit and warm and running smoothly. The soft jazz, the low conversation, the particular atmosphere of a well-managed evening in a well-managed space. Everything about the room was exactly what it had always been. Miranda had simply lost her access to it. She turned back to me. "This is going to have consequences," she said. "Every conduct enforcement action can be appealed through the formal member review process," I said. "The process and timeline are in the membership agreement, which I'm happy to provide in writing." She looked at me for one long, final moment. I think she was waiting for something. For the old reaction. The slight flinch, the visible uncertainty, the evidence that her threat had found the wound she'd been aiming at for months. She didn't find it. Because it wasn't there anymore. The security officer stepped forward slightly. Miranda turned. She collected her guest with the composed, unreadable expression of someone who has decided how they're going to frame this story before they've finished experiencing it. They walked toward the elevator. I watched them go. Then I turned back to the operations station and picked up the event document I had set down. There was still an hour of my shift remaining. I finished it. Clifton Vale contacted the board chair directly 2 days after the revocation. Mr. Adekoya took the call. He listened. He was professional, warm, and entirely clear. The conduct review had followed the club's established process in every particular. The documentation had been thorough. The committee's decision had been unanimous. The enforcement action had been taken by the Director of Member Experience in the full exercise of her authorized role. The membership agreement that both Clifton and Miranda had signed contained an explicit acknowledgement that all members were subject to the same conduct standards regardless of membership tier or revenue contribution. Clifton's concerns were received and acknowledged. The revocation stood. Miranda filed a formal appeal 3 weeks later. The appeal review process was conducted by a separate 3-person committee per the membership agreement's provisions. The appeal committee reviewed the full documentation package independently. They denied the appeal. The revocation was upheld. Miranda Vale's VIP access was permanently restricted to standard member access, public dining, general event attendance, and the standard lounges. The VIP lounge entrance, where she had spent 4 months treating the staff as if their dignity was optional and treating the club's policies as if they applied to other people, would not open for her again. Clifton retained his membership. Miranda did not renew hers the following cycle. 8 months after the revocation, Sterling City Club's board approved an expansion of the Director of Member Experience role into a newly created Club Operations Director position. The expansion included oversight of the club's 3 satellite venues, direct authority over the annual programming calendar, and a formal seat on the executive committee that advised the board on major operational decisions. The board chair called me on a Tuesday morning. I accepted. I thought about Miranda for a while after that call, not with bitterness. I want to be precise about that. The thing that had driven me through the rebuild, through the 4 years at Sterling, through the months of careful documentation and patient waiting, it had never been about her. It had been about the work, about doing the job correctly, about building something real enough that it could hold up when someone decided to test it. Miranda had tested it, and it had held. She had threatened to ruin my life again with 1 phone call. What she had not accounted for was that the second time we were in the same room, we were not in her territory. We were in mine. And in mine, authority was not inherited from a surname or purchased with a membership fee. It was earned through consistency, documented through accuracy, and exercised with the steady, unshakable confidence of someone who had already survived the worst that person could do. The people who try to destroy you twice usually forget one thing. The second time, you're ready.